Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly shot in the arm for motivation, education, and inspiration on your path to success with myopia management. And I have a very special guest on with me today. As far as celebrities in our industry is concerned, he's at the top of the list. He is the Director of Technical Affairs at Precision Technology Services, a clinical advisor for Medmont, a research scientist and clinical instructor at Pacific University. He's written articles, textbooks, speaks extensively about Ortho-K, topography capture, myopia management, an absolute legend in our industry. Randy Kojima, it's my honor to welcome you to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's you're too kind. I work with a lot of really smart people, and I'm lucky to benefit from their big brains. I just go along for the ride.
Very humble as well. Randy, there's so much I want to ask you about like, because I've known you since 2009, I think. That's when I think I first met you. I had to think about it. I think it was when you were sitting for your fellowship with the Orthokeratology Academy of America, is what it was back then, and then would become the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. And, you know, here's what I remember is that, you know, we planned the fellowship event at that Vision by Design. And a bunch of the guys were really excited. And my dad says, "Oh, Randy Kojima is going to take the fellowship exam." And I was like, "Who is Randy Kojima?" And he's like, "He's a big deal. He's Mr. Topography." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And he goes, "You know, a lot of guys here, speaking of the meeting as a whole, could learn a lot from Randy Kojima." And I was like, "Well, like who?" And my dad, I'll never forget this. He looks me right in the eye and says, "Me, for one." You know? And then, you know, you came in with the rest of the group, and there's usually like an extensive preparation process for the exam. There's like a study period, and here's what you need to know. And you like came in fresh, took the exam, nailed it, and became a fellow. And that was my first introduction to Randy Kojima. And so like, that's kind of where I wanted to start, because I feel like that's like a pivotal time and place, because your experience with our industry is kind of wrapped up with the AAOMC, with the Ortho-K Academy. So I want to start there. Like, you were speaking about the topics related to our industry, and what got you interested and started in that part of the process? What got you interested in myopia management, and what brought you to Vision by Design?
Yeah, I can remember the point very clearly. We had Pat Caroline come up and give a talk in Vancouver, BC, where I am, on rigid contact lenses, on corneal GP, and just kind of learning to fit them better and being more confident with them. And he did about 50% of corneal GP, and then maybe some multifocal stuff, but he saved about 10% at the end to talk about this new thing, this rebirth of orthokeratology, and what was called at the time accelerated Ortho-K. And it was pretty cool that we could achieve centration, which was always a problem in the past, that we could provide the patient with a comfortable lens, which always was an issue if you have a small lens moving around a lot, and it could improve patients' vision. So that's kind of how it started in about 97 or so. And then that led to a whole string of connections with people like your father that were very keen about Ortho-K and had been so for many, many years. So I feel like I definitely rode on the backs of some greats to start that path, because it would have been daunting without, the expertise of so many to guide you along.
Right. That's such an important point to make. Like, I kind of call that the James Kirk era of Ortho-K and myopia management, where it was like, it was kind of a kick in the door mentality. There were no online courses. There weren't any professional organizations. There was like a smattering of experts here and there, but these are people that have just learned by doing and cut their teeth on like success and failure. So if that was the moment that kind of whet your appetite, so to speak, for, myopia management and Ortho-K, what happened then after that? Like, how did you get fully into the specialty?
Yeah, as probably everybody on this podcast knows, in Ortho-K, there's a lot of pieces that are new. You have to fit a lens that's worn when the patient sleeps and not put on in the beginning of the day. So there's learning about those procedures, topography, obviously a huge part, and understanding the construction of these very odd reverse geometry lenses. That was all very new. So going to conferences like the Vision by Design was so important to kind of improve your knowledge, your confidence, and have a path that made sense. And the mentorship, I can't overstate how important the mentorship is with this type of specialty, and maybe all specialties too. So being exposed to somebody who understands corneal topography, being exposed to somebody who understands this kind of specialty, and not just how to build the lenses and problem solve, but how to implement in practice. That's a huge part in itself as well.
And who would you say, like, you speak of mentors, that's a common theme for a lot of people that come from the AAOMC pedigree. So who were some individuals that had a dramatic influence over your, development in Ortho-K?
Yeah, for sure. Pat Caroline was the beginning, and he's certainly everything in between, and still to this day. Craig Norman as another person, just understanding the strategy of this and how to bring this specialty to a broader audience, and for sure John Mountford, the guy who wrote the orthokeratology textbook. It's hard not to underestimate how much he influenced me in my understanding of topography, my understanding of Ortho-K, the scientific process, that whole thing. And then definitely a lot of folks like your dad, actually, Matt, that, had been doing it so long, and to learn from their expertise. The folks in the trenches, they really have a lot to teach us. Like, certainly the scientists were so important, the people like Helen Swarbrick and Pauline Cho, and they're just so critical to where we are today. But also the people that were, as you said earlier, trying out lenses, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes. I can't imagine how much investment, your dad as an example, right. And I know in John Mountford's case and in Pat's case, they've all talked about how many lenses that they paid for to try to learn how to make this thing work. And in those early days, there wasn't warranty on
right.
fitting Ortho-K. So you basically, every lens that you purchased was yours. You owned it. And if it didn't work, you still owned it. So, that was a great sacrifice and a great enthusiasm for the specialty, wasn't it? To have invested that much in believing in the hope and the outcomes for patients.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of those, early pioneers would call that the cost of an education. Mm-hmm. Like that's how they viewed it. And I often wonder, like, I keep saying I want to do like a whole episode about the generational differences in the myopia management, industry, the various communities that we have, the difference between fitters today and fitters from back then. What, have we lost something, or gained something, or maybe it's just different over all that time? Because one of the benefits of the role that you've played in our industry is you've been there in those beginning phases. You've seen how we've developed. And I want to get your opinion on this. Like, I've run into so many, new to Ortho-K, new to myopia management docs who are so intimidated about Ortho-K especially. And that's not what I'm used to. I'm used to AAOMC docs from the early days who, like, as we just described. Where do you think, like, where did this change come from in our industry? Did we lose something that older generation had? Or is it just a different playing field now? What do you think?
If we talk to, let's say, your father's generation and some of these practitioners who started maybe a generation before, they all seem to repeat the same thing, that the evolution of contact lenses, I can only speak for those because that's my area, but the evolution really came from the clinic and less so from academic sites. Now, the great research was done at the academic sites. I don't want to take away from that at all, but a lot of the innovation that brought about soft lenses, rigid lens change, orthokeratology, scleral, that all started in the clinic. And I don't know that today we have that same focus where practitioners are driving the design change in lenses. It seems to be more company oriented, that there's now great effort by every company to evolve the lenses, and certainly in academia as well. So yeah, there's been a bit of a shift. And to your point, can we shift it back so that practitioners are creating the kind of innovation that they did in the very early days of contact lenses? Like if you literally look at the names, like Wesley Jessen, these are practitioners that started in the clinic, and they brought innovation to our industry. And there's so many names like that they were the ones that created the lenses that we have today.
Right. Right. That's such a great point. I mean, as industry, as companies have taken more of a role in the process, I've seen a lot of, designs being advertised as like the easier or more simpler and straightforward mode of designing Ortho-K lenses. Like when I was coming up in the industry, I guess I would be the equivalent of a myopia coordinator, as the AAOMC would designate it, right? Like I grew up in my parents' practice, and I was used to trial sets, and empirical fitting, talking to the, my dad would talk to the rep and do lens design, but then he also did more advanced design, and we seem to be moving into that future of software-based lens design. As the guy when it comes to topography, I want to ask you about, how you became so invested in topography capture, and what your viewpoints on this are, because this is obviously like one of your great things. I remember when I was with J&J, I had a couple of accounts. We would talk about the importance of topography capture, and I'm referencing things that I've heard you say 100 times. And it seems like these things have to be repeated over and over again. As somebody who is, the topography guy, why is there such a shift, do you think, to move to software-based designs that require quality topography capture? And yet this is like the top thing that's getting skipped for the modern, eye care professional. So I want you to, let's start at like how you became interested in topography capture, and then would go on to become a speaker for it, and how this has changed over time. Hopefully I'm making sense. That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's real simple for me, at least. Remembering back to when we designed everything from K readings, and as everyone knows, K readings are a pretty small area of the cornea, and we're going to fit a much larger surface area than what the K readings measure. So I always felt so confused, especially as it related to the irregular cornea. You would have, let's say, 9 diopter astigmatism, and the base curve you chose was halfway in between that cylinder, let's say. Whereas in a normal eye, you'd be much closer to the flat K. Now, how do you come to any sort of path that was logical when you could be all over the board with where you started with a contact lens based on case? And, it would be like if you were to fit me with a suit purely based on my weight, You didn't know my height. You didn't know the shoulder width. You didn't know the girth at my stomach. And, all that kind of thing that goes into building a bespoke set of clothing for somebody. That's what K-readings are like to me. It's like taking one little piece of the whole story and then trying to guess at what the rest should be. So when topography came around in the late 80s, and it was a little more common in the clinic, a lot more common in the 90s, and then, of course, even more so after the millennium, you could make connections between why you ended up with this lens based on what you saw in the topography. And then you could start to use the topography to design the contact lens. So it was like, at first, the topography was just validating where you ended up with from your fitting skill. But then later, the topography was directing it. And now, today, we really rely so much less on the fitting skill that it's so much more, as you suggested. You use software-based fitting. So the topography goes into the software and it automatically kicks out a lens. You don't have to think about it at all. So it's really changed. And, I think that is a great point, Matt, that you brought up earlier. It circles us back to, why do practitioners not drive a lot of the lens innovation? And I mean, it could be that in the generation before, they didn't have experts at the lab in many cases. In some cases they did, but in many cases, they had to figure out how to improve the outcomes. It was 100% reliant on the practitioner. But today, we can be 100% reliant on the lab. They have such strong consultant teams that you really can know very little about contact lenses, but just provide them with the answers that they need, and they can help you through the process. So we have become, like everything in life, so much more reliant on technology, haven't we?
Right. Yeah. And so, okay, so then let me pose a potential problem then to you, that I see happening, which is that if we're not taking quality topography capture, right, but we are relying on consultation, which is excellent, we're missing out on potentially the practitioner learning as much as they can, which in my opinion is a huge part of that process. And that's kind of like creating a gap. Of my experience with orthokeratologists is that they want to know as much as they can and learn as much as they can. And are we creating some sort of like stopgap in between in this process? Do you think, like, you are an expert in topography capture, you teach classes on it, you're teaching classes at Vision by Design coming up about it, and so, like, are we going to lose something in that part of the process because it is so important? What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely possible, for sure. I wonder if the gap that you're referring to is made up for in the technology. That,
Yeah.
as an example, let's say that we take topography on a patient, we send it off to the lab. I don't have expertise about how to build the lens, so I let the consultant do it. They send me a lens, it goes on eye. It's not working 100%. So then I image the lens, the fluorescein pattern. I send the data from the autorefractor or my subjective refraction, and of course the topography. All of that data gets sent to the consultant and they're able to provide the answers. So while the expertise that the practitioner needs is to understand what's going on, what is the patient experiencing, I don't have to be as knowledgeable on what I'm seeing exactly. And in what I mean by that is, let's say we're talking about the fluorescein pattern of an Ortho-K lens. I don't know if I should steepen the reverse curve, flatten the reverse curve, increase the toricity, decrease the toricity, alter edge lift. I could rely on the images I've taken, sent to the consultant, and they can really fill that gap for me. So technology, I think, is really helping to fill that gap. But having that understanding, that knowledge certainly doesn't hurt. And as you know, there are designs that are very much technology reliant, but they also require that the practitioner knows how to use the technology, how to modify when things don't work out. It becomes 100% reliant on the practitioner. So there's those kind of systems as well that, the practitioner still needs to be knowledgeable.
Right. Right. And I mentioned that, you speak extensively, specifically on those subjects that I mentioned earlier. So let me ask you this, like when did you officially transition into Randy Kojima, the speaker? Because from my perspective, as somebody who was like running Vision by Design and developing, meeting the meeting for the AAOMC and the industry, like you and Pat Caroline were this like, and still are this like magical speaking duo who kind of shaped how speaking in myopia is done. If you understand what I'm saying, like the two of you created the template, in my opinion, for how to speak about Ortho-K, about myopia management, about lens design, and all the different aspects of our industry. When did that happen for you? When did you become Randy Kojima, the speaker? Like what year was this? And like how, like I have this vision of Randy Kojima as like the perfect speaker. Were you scared in the beginning? Did you talk about that experience for you? Like, what was it like to transition into speaking on stage at like Vision by Design and then all these other meetings that followed?
I'm sure, like many, it starts so slow and so small. And it would be a small group of just sharing your understanding, what little it might be. And for me, that's what it was in the beginning, that orthokeratology was only practiced by a small group of experts. And when it was moving in the direction of being shared with a wider audience, not just these specialists that have stayed together in this very tight group. I think that helped because nobody knew much about Ortho-K in the group of us, so we could share what we understood. And it took a long time, for sure, to learn from, let's say, Pat as an example. And the research makes a huge difference. I have doing testing of whatever sort, just helping to build your knowledge base and making connections between other areas that you might not really understand very clearly. So it really started very slow, and it was helped a ton by the mentors. I relied heavily on them for understanding the 1,000 questions that I didn't understand. And again, Matt, I think it was helpful that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, people knew very little about corneal topography. Even if you had one, you used very little of what it could do. And we've learned a lot about the instrument. So it's just this slow evolution of learning more as we go. And, as you said earlier, making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so, yeah, for me, I feel like it was definitely a slow process. And today, just speaking, when we work with our master's students and our residents that are maybe giving their first talk, it takes you back to that point when you were just so nervous to stand up in front of people and so nervous to share your message. You weren't sure if you were going to deliver, and you weren't sure if what you had to say was going to be powerful enough to be compelling, and that you just have to do over and over and over again before you can stand up and be comfortable. But I'll tell you, I still have the butterflies relative to the material. You always want to make sure that your material is strong enough that it'll be interesting. I mean, if the entire audience is putting their heads down or popping their heads back, you're not connecting. And so, yeah, it's something that I really enjoy, that challenge of making sure that you've prepped something that hopefully will be valuable to the group, that something they can use.
Right. How do you keep challenging yourself in that aspect? Because your lectures are always like fully attended. Sometimes there's people at the back, of the venue, standing room only. I've seen this happen time and time again. As someone who's been speaking extensively for so long in so many different venues on these topics, how do you stay fresh then? How do you like challenge yourself to keep giving the best lectures that you can? How do you maintain this like high level?
Yeah, I definitely notice when I'm a broken record. And
Sure.
as an example, at VBD, I really enjoy the boot camp. I really enjoy working with young practitioners that are, new practitioners to orthokeratology. And that is always so exciting because they're always so hungry and curious of the knowledge. But I definitely feel a bit like I can be a broken record on fundamentals, but you have to talk about them in general sessions. If there's no research that you're doing yourself or reading about and dissecting and being able to communicate to the audience, then I think it could be very difficult to keep on going year after year without something really fresh. So Pat Caroline really taught me about that we have to study all the time. We
Mm.
have to be learning and then share what you learn. And if you always have new material, then we're all going to continue to learn together. And I think that's the most powerful thing, is that we, whether it's in the clinic and testing out new methods, new lenses, whatever that might be, and sharing that. Or in our case, we do a lot of work with lens design. So we're always evolving lenses, or trying to, and sharing what we find from, those attempts. And we learn a ton from the mistakes and a ton from the successes. So yeah, I love to do that kind of thing where we're bringing new material and new curiosities that we've either failed or were successful at.
Right. Right. And I have seen so many, I would have called them rising stars back then, in speaking in, Ortho-K, especially at Vision by Design. And I've noticed a lot of them model their speaking habits around you and Pat.
Mm.
I think, like, what is the saying? Like, imitation is the highest form of flattery. Like, I remember one year specifically, and you're gonna laugh at how well I remember this. One year at Vision by Design, Sarah and I really wanted to get the branding of the meeting in every single photo when somebody was speaking. So we put a lot of time and effort to getting, the logo for Vision by Design and the background set just the way we want it, so that every time a speaker was on stage, we could get those pictures taken and everybody would know what meeting these people were at, right?
And I moved too much, didn't I?
You not only moved too much, you went to the floor. You stood on the floor instead of on the stage. And I remember Sarah and I were laughing hysterically about it, because we kind of had this like stand-up comedian kind of mentality where when things don't go your way, you just kind of like laugh about it. It's hysterical to you. But the thing in that moment that I want to focus on is, like, you brought a level of, like, maybe intimacy is the right or wrong word, but you brought a level of personalization to your lectures, because you were no longer standing on stage. You were right in front of everybody lecturing as you normally do. And the funny thing is like, that's not just a trend I saw get repeated at other meetings. I saw it get repeated at that meeting by other speakers who had seen what you did. And I was just blown away by it. Let me ask you this then, kind of in that same vein, because, you've been a contributing author. You've, written in textbooks, articles, spoken on these subjects. You've done videos, all this extensive work. Like, what has been the most rewarding aspect of, like, teaching or sharing your knowledge, or speaking on stage, like, with other professionals?
Mm. If the audience stays awake, I always think that's a good thing. The cool thing about speaking, I think, is the feedback loop is immediate, that you know when you're connecting and when you're not. And I kind of like that you immediately can tell if you're making sense and if you're compelling enough to keep people awake. And in the COVID times, that was a real challenge. Like, I found just talking to the screen, I became so disconnected from the audience. You'd have no idea if you were doing a good or a bad job, because you were just staring at the screen, staring at your slides. And I really like being on the floor, being closer with people, just because I I'm not smart enough to talk down on people. I want to be with everybody, and I want us to learn all this together. I want us to be colleagues, and so I feel like you're closer to faces and being able to read, the audience better when you're on the floor, and just moving around and just being able to see the whole audience. Sometimes our rooms are relatively wide, and it would be easy to become very disconnected from the speaker when he's on one side of the room and the screen is over here. And it's nice to just have that connection, both as an attendee and as a speaker too.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Matt?
Oh, it totally did. And my follow-up question then is, because it really speaks to like what you were saying is like, removing that distance between you and the audience, staying connected with them, right? I think that's a perfect example of you and your personality. At Vision by Design, you can learn just as much from people in the hallways or during the breaks or in the bar afterwards as you can on stage. And, you are certainly a person that very accessible at Vision by Design. I've watched you open up a laptop and start going through cases and talking to people. Is that just a natural part of who you are as an individual? Is that something that you had to cultivate? Because me personally, I would find that absolutely terrifying. To me, you're a celebrity in our industry, and I've seen people just crowd around you and start asking you questions. Is that just a natural part of your personality, or is that something that you had to cultivate as a result of your career and the path it's taken?
Yeah, Matt, I really enjoy that we can all help each other. And, you and your family are a great example of that, where you're devoted to helping others. And I really get a kick out of the fact that maybe some pieces of the lecture could be used in somebody's practice. And if they come up and they ask a question, people don't ask just to be heard, just to have a conversation. They're genuinely, if they're coming up specifically to talk to you, they have a question that they want answered. And I enjoy that maybe I can help a little bit. And when we think about, if let's say we call it mentorship, that would be a bit extreme, because one quick question isn't truly mentorship. But what I'm getting at is, imagine how many people we help with each person that we might connect with, and if that one answer leads to better outcomes for 10 patients, and that leads to more questions being answered. I mean, it's so exponential, isn't it? That that's something I think that I think about once in a while when I'm a bit egotistical, that I would like to think that maybe I have helped in the end a lot of patients, or at least I hope that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. And
because that's the end point, right? Is to help the patients, and helping the practitioner means that a lot of patients may be helped, right?
Right. Yeah. And when you think of the breadth of what your knowledge and expertise has done for other doctors, it's it's staggering. That's what I love about people in our industry. It's like how many of us can say we're making an actual difference in people's lives in this world, a positive, meaningful difference. And that brings me back to the AAOMC. You've played a huge role in the AAOMC's development, going all the way back as far as I can remember. You're also a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry. You're a Scleral Lens Education Society fellow, if I'm not mistaken. As someone who's been a major contributor to the pivotal events that have shaped, these aspects of eye care, what role do these professional organizations play for the specialty lens field, and are they more important than ever in your opinion? What do you think?
Yeah, without question. If we take the Vision by Design, the AAOMC annual conference, that has to be the best place to go from zero to 100 it very quickly, right? That being able to learn about the fundamentals you need to be able to fill in gaps on some of the areas in between and learn some real specialist tips on how to optimize this in your practice. So I think the Vision by Design meeting could be one of the most powerful because it's so focused on that specialty and all the nuances of that specialty that one needs to know. So that one I think is really powerful. Academy of Optometry is also an interesting one in that it's where so many of us go to hear the most cutting edge research. And because the speakers are graded, if you don't do a good enough job, you don't end up having another opportunity to speak at Academy. So it does encourage the speakers to do their best job, to bring their best material, and standard is high. So yeah, I think the conferences are such great places to learn more. And if we think back to the COVID times and how much we sat on our computers looking at the screen, learning from somebody in that environment, how easy it is to be distracted by your phone, by what's going on in the room around you. I mean, it's, I don't think the best environment for learning. Going to at least my opinion, is going to the conference is such a valuable place because it puts you in that chair. It encourages you to stay focused on the speaker and the slides that are there, and not be so influenced by what's going on in the home, like your kids screaming.
Right. And it provides you with a level of investment, right? Like if you're going to take the time away from your practice, if you're going to spend the money on hotel, flight, and meeting registration, it's like you better come, ready and prepared to learn, and I think in-person meetings have such a great community aspect to them. For instance, like Vision by Design and GSLS too, and so many other opportunities to just meet with people, talk with them, and get get that recognition you're with your people in myopia management for sure.
Well, I mean, you said it earlier, Matt, about the things that happen in the hallway, the
Right.
time spent at the bar even, and those connections that you make. I mean, the mentorship that's possible because of those connections, and then the opportunity to work together on issues that you haven't figured out or things you want to study. I mean, being able to make those connections with people, the networking, I think to me is one of the most valuable parts of going to Vision by Design over the years, and many conferences that are smaller and tighter like that. OSO is another great meeting that has that similar vibe and that similar atmosphere of sharing information with each other and helping us, as a group to grow.
Right, definitely. Randy, speaking of Vision by Design, actually, you've got a couple of lectures at the meeting, like, what are you going to be speaking on? I mean, you're in boot camp, of course, but what are you going to be speaking on at Vision by Design?
Yeah, Pat and I are going to talk about what's called myopia defocus dosage. And you can think of MDD, as we call it, as the signal that orthokeratology and soft lenses and even glasses, the signal that they send to the back of the eye. And how do we measure that signal? How do we moderate that signal? How do we optimize that signal? So it's really an area we've been focused on since I think about 2009 was the first time we started looking at the topographies, not just as an effect, like let's say, did it create 3 diopters effect? Well, is it 3 diopters effect the same for this patient as it is for this patient? Are they getting different levels of aberration? Are they getting different levels of myopia control signals? So super excited to have that conversation because it's evolving and we're still learning about it, how to use it, and how patients can benefit from it. So I'm really charged up about being able to give that talk. I'm really passionate about this. Can we create better than 50% slowing of eye growth? That's what typically Ortho-K studies suggest to us, that we can cut the eye growth in half. But more recent study says that we can cut it by up to 78%. Well, can we go beyond 78%? And this understanding the signal is one of the ways that we can target individual outcomes for each patient based on their pupil size, their eye shape, and their level of aberration that they need in the back of the eye to put the brakes on that eye growth.
Yeah, that's awesome. I always enjoy hearing you and Pat Caroline speak. It's one of the hallmarks of Vision by Design. So for the audience, like when you go to Vision by Design, go to the exhibit hall, go to the MedMont booth, and say to Randy Kojima, like, "Hey, I got fired up to come to VBD. I heard about your lecture. I heard your interview." All right, so we'll end there. Randy, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Pleasure.
Totally. And for everybody else, the Myopia Mindset is my gig. It is my passion. My mission in life is to spread the word about myopia management. I grew up around such individuals at the caliber of Randy Kojima, and I was like enchanted with working with people in this space from the very beginning. So I want to spread the word that myopia management is the greatest thing in the world and more ECPs should be doing it. And if you agree with that, if you enjoyed this podcast, and I figure you did because you've listened this far, then consider supporting the Myopia Mindset. You can do so at myopiamindset.com. You'll get extended versions of this episode and every other episode we do. You'll get a bonus episode each and every month, and you'll have access to the episodes ahead of everybody else in the release schedule. All right, so we'll end it there. Randy, thanks again. And for everybody else, we will see you at the next one.